The fork was halfway to my mouth when my brother's fiancée decided to make me the entertainment for the evening. "I just think it's so sweet," she said, swirling a glass of wine that cost more than my first car payment. "Spending your whole life in a little lab, mixing up your plant goop. It's almost like a hobby that pays." "Sort of." The table laughed, not a big laugh, the worst kind, the polite, knowing chuckle that says we've all agreed on this already and you're the last to find out. My father set down his bourbon and gave that slow, indulgent shake of the head he saved for me. "She's always been our practical one," he said, like that was a flaw he'd made peace with. My mother reached over and patted my hand, which is the thing she does instead of defending me. "We just want you to find someone, sweetheart. A woman shouldn't be alone with her test tubes forever." My brother didn't say anything. He just smiled into his steak, because his fiancée fighting his battles for him was exactly the kind of arrangement he liked. I want you to picture this restaurant for a second. White tablecloths. $90 entrees. A sommelier who pronounced the wines like he was naming his children. This was a celebration dinner for my brother's engagement, and I had driven an hour and a half from the city to sit at the foot of the table and be reminded gently and repeatedly that I was the disappointment they could afford to be kind about. And maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you've been the quiet one at your own family's table, the one they talk over, the one who gets handed the check-splitting math because at least you're good with numbers. If you have, do me a favor and stay with me, because I promise you this story goes somewhere. I set the fork down. Just set it down, soft, on the edge of the plate. And I looked at my brother's fiancée. Let's call her by what she called herself on her LinkedIn, a beauty investment strategist. And I said, "You're talking about Sable Botanics." Something flickered across her face, a half-second crack in the lacquer. "I'm sorry. The company your fund is circling, Sable Botanics. The one with the stabilized peptide." I kept my voice flat, almost bored. "You were bragging about it at Thanksgiving. Said you were going to scoop it up before the founder even understood what she was sitting on." She recovered fast. I'll give her that. "Oh, yes. Cute little ingredient startup out of some garage lab. My fund's looking at it. Honestly, we'll get it for nothing. The founder's some shut-in who has no idea how to monetize. We'll buy the IP and—" "You can't buy it," I said. My brother put his hand on my arm. "Delia, come on, don't make this weird." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on her. "You can't buy it," I said again, "because it isn't for sale. I own it. I'm the founder. Sable is mine." You ever hear a room go quiet so fast it has a sound? It does. It's a little vacuum, a small inward gasp of air, and then nothing. The candle on the table actually flickered. My mother's smile froze in place like someone had hit pause on her face. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without the rest of it. My family is not made of bad people. I need you to understand that because it would be easier if they were. They're not cruel for sport. They're performers. Their entire lives are a stage, and the only thing that's ever mattered to them is how the audience claps. My parents built their whole identity at the country club out in the leafy part of Connecticut where everyone's lawn is a competition. Success to them was always something you could photograph. A German sedan in the driveway. A firm handshake. A job title you could say at a cocktail party without explaining it. My brother was the trophy. He's a commercial real estate broker, which mostly means he wears good suits and talks louder than the deal warrants. But every once in a while he closes something big and brings home a check that lets everyone keep pretending. He was the golden one, the mirror they held up to themselves so they could see the family they wanted to be. And then there was me, the chemist, 29 years old, hair always a little frizzy from the lab humidity. The kind of person who gets seated next to the spouses at weddings because nobody's sure what to do with her. I was the safe one. The boring one. The one they called when the printer broke or the tax software glitched, but the one they talked over at parties. For most of my life, I genuinely believed them. I thought I was beige. I thought I was background. What none of them knew was that while they were performing, I was building. For 6 years, I'd been working on a single molecule, a botanical peptide extracted from a flower most people would mow over without a thought, that I'd learned to stabilize in a way that nobody in the industry had cracked. It does something quiet and unglamorous, and very, very valuable. It keeps active skincare compounds from degrading, which is a problem worth billions to people who sell creams in pretty jars. It isn't flashy. It's invisible. It just works. Like me. And 3 weeks before that dinner, I had quietly signed an exclusive global licensing deal. $9 million up front, royalties on top. I'd told no one. Not one person at that table. So when I walked out of that restaurant into the cold parking lot with my brother stammering, "What the hell is this? Is this a joke?" behind me, I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest with you. I felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones. I sat in my car with the engine ticking and my hands on the wheel, and I didn't drive for a long time. Because somewhere in that quiet, I finally understood why I'd hidden it all for so long. It wasn't humility. It was survival. There's a thing that happens in families that run on appearances. There's a name for it. Even the kind of household that's obsessed with image needs a star, and it needs a stain. My brother was the star. His shine was the whole point. But a star only looks bright if there's something dark behind it. That was my job. I wasn't actually boring. I was assigned to be boring. I was the flat gray wall they could stand my brother in front of so he'd pop. My steadiness, my quiet, my refusal to make scenes, all of it made his noise look like brilliance. I was the family's built-in, "At least we have one normal one." And that night, by saying 4 words out loud, "Sable is mine, Sable is mine," I had knocked the whole set down. I thought the truth would fix it. I genuinely did. I thought the sheer size of the number, $9 million, would finally make them see me. I thought maybe they'd be shocked into something like respect. I was wrong. I got home, dropped my keys in the bowl, and my phone lit up like a slot machine. It wasn't an apology. It was an escalation. The first one was from my mother. "Delia, I cannot believe you would humiliate that poor girl like that in public. I don't know where you learned to show off in such a tacky way. You will call her tomorrow and apologize." I read it 3 times. Tacky. Show off. Then my brother, "Are you a sand his indie? You just torched a major deal for me. She was helping ME. Why are you always so jealous of everyone? You ruin everything." I scrolled down looking for one thing. A single question. Is it true? What's Sable Botanics? $9 million, really? How? When? Are you okay? Anything. A flicker of curiosity about the daughter who'd apparently built something out of nothing. There was nothing, not one word about the company, not one word about the money. And that's when the cold clarity came, the kind that settles in your chest like a stone going down a well. They weren't angry that I'd succeeded. They were furious that I'd stepped out of my assigned role without asking. They weren't shocked that the boring one had a secret. They were shocked I'd had the nerve to say it where people could hear. I'd smudged the family photo. That was the unforgivable part. This was never about love. It was about who held the remote. A week went by. The silence curdled. It went from cold to heavy to something that pressed on me when I tried to sleep. And then, instead of a call, instead of anything human, a thing arrived in my mailbox. A thick cream envelope, heavy stock, the kind that's basically a flex, embossed lettering. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of my brother and his fiancée at the country club." I stood in my kitchen holding it, and I almost laughed, because this wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. It was a command dressed up in calligraphy. Show up, wear something nice, smile, pretend the dinner never happened, get back in your spot at the foot of the table. They were betting that my fear of being cut off was bigger than my need to be seen as a whole person. They thought I'd fold, the way I always folded. Apologize to keep the peace. Be the gray wall again. They'd forgotten something important about me. I don't fight. I don't scream. I'm a scientist. I gather. I document. And then I let the data speak in a voice nobody can argue with. So I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and I didn't think about the $9 million. I thought about her face. That little flicker of recognition when I said the name. We'll get it for nothing. The founder has no idea what she's sitting on. How did she know about Sable in the first place? I'd been so careful. I'd kept it under a shell company, separate addresses, a fake LLC named after a street I grew up on. How did my brother's fiancée, of all people, end up with the name? And then I remembered. 2 months earlier, as a market test, I'd sent a controlled sample kit and a sealed data room to a short list of beauty investment funds. Just a feeler, to see what an offer might look like before I signed with the licensee. I'd sent it under that shell LLC, no name attached to me, 11 funds. And one of them, I went back and checked, was hers. Here's the part that matters. I built the data room myself. Every one of those funds to access the formula files had to log into a portal I designed. And because I designed it, it logged everything. Every click. Every download attempt. Every screen share session ran through it. The platform records review calls by default, the way a lot of due diligence tools do, and I, of course, had kept the keys. My fingers were steady on the keyboard. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud and stupid. I was focused, and focus is quiet, and quiet is where I live. I pulled the access logs. What I found wasn't a fund doing diligence. It was a fund trying to break in. Dozens of sessions from her firm's IP range. Not reading the materials, probing them, running extraction tools against the sample data, trying to reverse engineer the peptide from the partial spectra I'd included. They weren't evaluating whether to buy my company. They were trying to figure out how to copy it and not pay me a dime. But that wasn't even the good part. See, I'm a chemist who spent 6 years on a molecule worth millions. Did they really think I'd send anything out without a tripwire? Tucked into the sample data was something I called the marker, a deliberate, unique isotopic signature, a fingerprint baked into the compound that served no purpose except this exact moment. Anyone who synthesized from my materials would carry my fingerprint in their batch, and there'd be no way to wash it out. The molecule would always confess where it came from. And the portal. The portal logged the review sessions. I opened the session folder. My heart was going harder than I wanted it to. There was one file from 8 weeks back, a recorded due diligence call from her firm. I clicked play. And there she was. My brother's fiancée, in a glass conference room, leaning over a laptop between 2 men in quarter zips who looked like they sold supplements. The audio was clean. Too clean. I could hear the air conditioning. The spectra's incomplete, one of the men was saying. Security's tight, we can't pull the full structure from what she gave us. And then her voice. Not the wine glass voice from the dinner, the real one. Flat and fast and cold. Then we don't license it. We crack the back half ourselves, synthesize our own version, and file before she does. By the time the little plant girl figures out what happened, she'll be suing a company 10 times her size with money she doesn't have. We bury her in legal fees and buy what's left for pennies. I stopped the recording. I sat back in my chair. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and gave up. They weren't just snobs. They weren't just careless. They were thieves who'd already written my obituary. and they'd done it on a recorded line, in my house, on my platform. I had the proof, and I had the marker, and I had an engagement party to attend. The country club was the kind of pretty that's exhausting. String lights, white peonies cascading off everything, a quartet sawing away in the corner. My mother floated through the room collecting compliments like a toll. My father held court by the bar, telling people about my brother's incredible trajectory. I came in wearing a plain navy dress, nothing flashy. Clean lines, good shoes, my hair pulled back. The uniform of a woman who is not here to be looked at. My mother spotted me from across the room, and I watched her shoulders drop 2 full inches with relief. She came at me fast and gripped my arm just a little too hard. "You came," she whispered, the smile stapled on. "Thank you, sweetheart. Now please, just be nice tonight. For your brother." "I'm not going to make a scene, Mom," I said, and I meant it, because what I had planned wasn't a scene. A scene is chaos. This was going to be precise. I got a club soda. I stood near the back. I watched my brother and his fiancée hold court in the center of the room like a couple in a luxury watch ad, and I waited. The toast started. My father went first, talking about my brother's bright future and his wonderful fiancée and the word synergy, which he used the way some people use prayer, with great feeling and no understanding. Then my brother stood, glowing, a glass in his hand, riding the high of being the center of everyone's eyes. "And I just want to say something about my little sister," he said. The room turned. I felt their faces swivel toward me like flowers tracking the sun. I didn't move. "I know Delia and I have had our differences," he said, grinning, working the crowd. "But I'm just so glad she's here. So glad she finally gets to see what real success looks like up close." A few laughs. He raised his glass an inch in my direction. "To my baby sister. Stay weird, D." The applause was polite. I wasn't listening to it. I was watching her, my brother's fiancée. She was looking right at me over the rim of her glass, and she was smiling, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smug, settled smile of someone who is sure, completely, restfully sure, that she has already won. She thought she was the smartest person in that room. She was so confident, and her confidence wasn't built on anything but the absolute certainty that a quiet woman in a plain dress could not possibly be a threat. She had no idea that the boring little plant girl wasn't just in the room. She was the room. "May I say a couple of words?" I said. I didn't wait for permission. I just walked forward and lifted the microphone off the little stand. The quartet trailed off mid-phrase. The buzz in the room dropped to nothing. My brother and his fiancée were both frozen, watching me with the same tight, nervous, "what is she doing" look. I smiled, small, polite. Congratulations to my brother, and congratulations to his bride. I let it sit a beat. "I wanted to say something to you," I said, looking right at her. "You were right." Her smile twitched. Confused. "At the dinner, you were right about me. My work is boring." I looked around at all the curious, half-amused faces. "It really is, especially the part where you have to sit and review hours of recorded conference calls. Tedious stuff. Footage like this one." I pulled my phone out of my clutch. I walked, calm as anything, over to the projector they'd been using for the slideshow of engagement photos. I plugged in the little adapter I'd brought. The big screen on the wall, which had been cycling through soft focus pictures of my brother and his fiancée on a beach, blinked black. And then it filled with a glass conference room. And her voice, her real voice, the cold one, the fast one, came roaring out of the country club sound system, over the peonies and the string lights and the open bar. We crack the back half ourselves, synthesize our own version, and file before she does. By the time the little plant girl figures out what happened, she'll be suing a company 10 times her size with money she doesn't have. I have heard a lot of silences. That one had texture. It was the collective held breath of 150 people who had just watched the floor open under someone. My father had gone the color of paper. My mother's hand was clamped over her mouth. My brother stared at the screen like he was trying to read a language he didn't speak, and his fiancée, her smile was gone. What was left was something raw and reptilian, a face I'd never seen on her. She lunged for the microphone. I lifted one hand. I didn't raise my voice. Don't. She stopped. That's intellectual property theft, I said evenly. It's a federal matter. And you just played your own confession for a room full of your investors, your colleagues, and your future in-laws. I turned back to the crowd, who were not breathing. Since we're sharing tonight, I said, I'll fill in the rest. I'm the founder of Sable Botanics. 3 weeks ago, I signed a $9 million exclusive licensing deal for a compound. This woman's firm tried to steal off a server I built and got caught doing on a recorded line. My mother made a small, wet, choking sound. But here's the part you'll really enjoy. I looked back at her. She was frozen, hands still half raised. I didn't just license it. The parent holding company that owns her fund, the one she answers to, has been in talks with my company for 2 months. We finalized this morning. We're merging. I let it land. I'm coming on as their chief science officer and head of IP security, effective Monday. I watched her do the math. I watched the blood leave her face as it added up. Which means, I said quietly, I'm your boss's boss. I gave her the smallest, most professional smile I had. I'll see you Monday. We'll need to talk about your handling of confidential materials. I set the microphone back on the stand. The little click of it carried in the dead air. And then I turned around and I walked out, past the peonies, past my paper-white father, out into the parking lot and the cool air, and I did not look back, because I didn't need to. I already knew exactly how it would land. The fallout was not dramatic. That's the thing nobody tells you about real consequences. They're quiet and procedural and final. She was fired before she ever made it in on Monday. Not by me. I never even saw her. The holding company's legal team watched the recording I'd forwarded, looked at the access logs and the signed merger paperwork, and walked her out with a security escort and a banker's box. There was no argument to have. The marker I'd built into the compound meant any version they synthesized would always point home. They settled with me. Quietly. Generously. She tried to sue me after. Invasion of privacy, she said, for the recording. It went nowhere, because the platform's terms, which her firm had clicked agree on, disclosed the recording in plain language. She lost, and she paid my fees, which I thought was a nice touch. The engagement didn't survive it. She called it off, or he did, depending on who you asked. She vanished from the leafy part of Connecticut entirely. My brother didn't lose his job. He lost the only thing he'd ever actually had, which was an audience. He became, almost overnight, the poor guy whose fiancée turned out to be a thief, a thing people murmured about at the club with their heads tilted in pity. His shine, the only currency he'd ever banked in, was just gone. You can't broker your way back from being pitied. And my parents called. Oh, they called. Dozens of times. The voicemails followed a path I could have charted in advance. First, the anger. Delia. What have you done? You've made a fool of this entire family. Then the bargaining. Sweetheart, please, we just need to sit down and fix this before it gets worse. And finally, weeks in, my mother's voice cracking down the middle. Please, you've made your point. You've made it. Now stop. You're tearing this family apart. And that's the line that finally made me understand they would never, ever get it. I wasn't tearing anything apart. There was nothing to tear. A family that needs one of its own to stay small so the others can feel tall isn't a family that's together. It's just an arrangement that hasn't been tested yet. I didn't break us. I just stopped agreeing to be the weak place in the wall. I stopped being the gray they painted my brother against. The cracks they kept yelling about had always been there. I just stopped pretending I couldn't see them, and once one person stops pretending, the whole performance falls apart. It turns out you can't run a play if the scenery walks off the stage. I didn't do it to win. I want you to know that. I didn't even do it for revenge. Not really. I did it to end the conversation. To stop apologizing for being good at something. That week, after the merger closed, I sat in my apartment and looked at the number on the contract for a long time. And for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like a secret I had to keep or a wall I had to hide behind. It just felt like a door standing open. So I booked a flight, one way, to Lisbon because I'd always wanted to see the ocean from a place where no one knew my name or my role or which kind of daughter I was supposed to be. I packed one bag. I closed my laptop, and the soft click of the lid sounded like the last page of something heavy finally turning over. And that night, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I slept all the way through till morning. No buzzing phone, no rehearsing apologies in the dark, just quiet. The good kind, the kind that isn't empty at all. If you've ever been the quiet one, the safe one, the one they talk over and seat at the kids' table well into your 30s, I want you to hear this from someone who lived it. Being underestimated is not the same as being weak. Sometimes the person sitting still at the end of the table isn't lost. She's just running the numbers and waiting for the right moment to read them out loud. If this story found you somewhere familiar, tell me about it down in the comments. I read them. And if you want to stay for the next one, you know what to do. I used to believe that staying quiet was the same thing as keeping the peace. For most of my life, I swallowed every small insult at that table because I thought silence was the price of belonging. What I learned the night I plugged my phone into that projector is that there's a difference between peace and surrender, and I'd been paying for surrender and calling it love. Here's the thing nobody warned me about. Everything that happened to my brother's fiancée, she built with her own 2 hands. I didn't ruin her. She sat in a glass conference room and decided to steal from a woman she'd never bothered to know, and she said it out loud on a recorded line. The cause was hers. I just happened to be holding the consequence. That's how it almost always works. People don't get destroyed by their enemies nearly as often as they get destroyed by the thing they were already doing in the dark. She thought she was clever. She mistook a quiet woman for a weak one, and that single, lazy assumption cost her a career, an engagement, and a name she could walk back into a room with. But I don't want you to walk away thinking the lesson is just wait for bad people to ruin themselves. Because they don't always, and even when they do, you have to be ready. The reason I had that recording wasn't luck. It was 6 years of doing careful, unglamorous work when no one was clapping. I built the marker into that molecule. I built the logs into that portal. I did the boring, honest version of the work every single day, while my family told me I was the disappointment. The competence that saved me wasn't summoned in a crisis. It was poured, one quiet hour at a time, into a foundation I couldn't see the shape of yet. And there's a third piece, the hardest one. When my mother's voice cracked and she begged me to stop tearing the family apart, every cell in my body wanted to fold, to apologize, to go back to being the gray wall. It would have been so much easier. Holding my ground that night took more out of me than building the whole company did, because it meant accepting that some people will only love the version of you that makes them feel taller. So if you're the quiet one at your own table, I'll leave you with this. Protect your decency, because the moment you trade it away to win, you've already lost the only thing worth keeping. Keep sharpening your mind, doing the real work in the dark where nobody's watching, because that's the part no one can take from you. And when the moment comes to stand up straight and refuse to shrink, find the spine to do it, even when your own mother is asking you to sit back down. I didn't book a one-way flight to run away from my family. I booked it to finally stop auditing myself for their comfort. Some silences are weakness. This one, for the first time, was rest.